Hello, I am Matt the Lesser, coming to you with the first of what I hope will be a full series on Terra Mystica fan factions. For those of you who are not yet aware, the publishers of Terra Mystica are in the process of releasing a bunch of fan factions. They are already out and playable on Board Game Arena, technically still in the testing phase, but have been around long enough and have been tweaked enough that they're getting close to where they're going to end up. And so I figured it was time to do a little series on some basic strategy for these new fan factions. So these videos are aimed at people who are at least reasonably familiar with Terra Mystica, have played a few games, understand sort of the basic game mechanics and the rules, played the base factions, but are looking to get into playing the fan factions and just want to talk a little bit about their abilities and their nuances and how they play, so that if you want to join fan faction games on Board Game Arena or play these in real life once they come out, you are a little bit better equipped to do so. So we're going to jump right in with the first faction, the Conspirators. And by the way, I'm not really very good at video editing, so this is the no frills content, right? We're going to give you the content, no fancy sounds, no fancy animations. I'm doing this in one take, but let's go. Let's jump right in with the Conspirators. And I chose the Conspirators as the first fan faction to do an overview for because they are one of the most straightforward of the fan factions. As you'll see in a second, their board is pretty basic. Their ability is straightforward. They are reasonably comfortable for someone who's familiar with Terra Mystica to drive even the very first time that they're playing them. And so I think they are a good intro faction both to talk about and also to potentially play with one of your first games as the fan factions. Think about the Halflings or the Nomads, some of the more basic base factions, and there's a lot of similarities with Conspirators. They also released all of this really cool artwork for the fan faction, so I love this Conspirator guy here pondering over his crystal ball with this awesome mountain in the background, conspiring how he's going to swap out his favor tiles to the demise of his opponents. You will see that is what this faction's all about, favor tiles. So let's look at the board. As we said, Conspirators have a pretty basic board, normal income in most scenarios, the only exception being they do, like their color counterpart, the Dwarves, the Conspirators are a gray faction, have three coin income on their first TP. All other income is totally the same, and normal costs of all their buildings. They have a 6 coin cost Stronghold, a 6 coin cost Sanctuary, normal ship upgrades, normal dig upgrades, normal starting resources. So after the initial production, they'll have 6 workers and 15 coins, plus whatever they get from their round 1 bonus tile. And they start with 5 power in Bowl 1 and 7 power in Bowl 2, like many factions. So nothing too complicated to deal with or remember as you're going through with the Conspirators relative to sort of your basic standard Terra Mystica faction. So what is the Conspirators' ability? They have this iconography is pretty straightforward. Every time you get a favor tile, you get 2 coins. Very easy, and also very good. Coins are the most valuable resource in Terra Mystica, or at least the most scarce resource in Terra Mystica. And so getting more coins is always going to be a good thing. Now, you might initially look at this ability and say, but wait a second, you probably only get, maybe 3 or 4 favor tiles in the average game of Terra Mystica, maybe even 2 or 3. Like, is 6 to 10 coins really that valuable of an ability? And if you were just looking at it from that perspective, you would be right. The answer would be no. But this ability synergizes very well with the Conspirators Stronghold, which is a very good stronghold and one that you will be building in most games that you play with the Conspirators. In fact, you will often be building it early, as we will get into in just a second. But the Conspirators Stronghold, very strong, and it has 2 benefits. Number 1 is when you build it, you immediately get a favor tile. So this is the exact same as the Orin, who get a favor tile when they build their stronghold. So you immediately get a stronghold, and with it, voila, Conspirators comes 2 coins. So immediately a little bit of synergy right there. But then the ability of that stronghold is that once per round, including the round that you build the stronghold, you get this button, which allows you to swap out your favorite tile, any favorite tile that you have, for any favorite tile that is available in the pile that you don't already have. So you can't take 2 copies of something, but otherwise you can take anything you want. And that counts as getting a new favorite tile, so you get an additional 2 coins. So, for example, if you build your stronghold in round 1 with the Conspirators, and then you use this ability every round, which you will, that is 12 coins just from the swaps, plus that initial 6, 8, 10 coins, depending on how many strongholds, temples, sanctuaries you build and get those initial favorite tiles. So this ability can easily, over the course of the game, be worth upwards of 20 coins, which is really, really strong. The one downside of this stronghold is it doesn't have any basic income. But that's okay, because you're basically get a 2 coin income for every time you swap that favorite tile every round. So kind of makes up for it. And 2 coins would actually be on the better side of stronghold incomes. Not the best, but definitely better than 2 power, which is what a lot of factions have. So that's the main thing with the Conspirators board. The last thing to note with this button is that when you get rid of a favorite tile, you do have to go down the cult steps that come with that favorite tile. So say you have a copy of Earth 2 and you want to swap it out for a copy of Water 1, so you can start sorting some trading posts. You do have to go down 2 steps on Earth. This little power icon is indicating that you don't lose or gain any power when you're going down. If you go over any of the thresholds, it's just the cult steps, because otherwise Conspirators would really rack up those cult points quite a bit. Just a couple other things to note here on the Conspirators board. They do not start with any cult steps. This is a bit of an offset because of all the favorite tile machinations that they're going to go through. So like their color counterparts, the Engineers and a couple other factions, they do have to start at 0 and work their way up to get some cult rewards. As we'll talk about in a bit, cult rewards are a big deal for the Conspirators. And then finally, as a 5-7 faction, they will need some leech in round 1 if they want to compete for the double spade action, or even would have to take a power tile just to get single spade or any of the other basic power actions. So, not a huge advantage for them there. Now that you know what their board looks like, when should you play the Conspirators? So let's talk about things to look at in a Conspirators game. If you're playing a pick factions game, when you might be thinking about picking them, or if an auction, sort of how you might value them given a certain setup. So talking first about the bonus tiles that are in the game. So we already talked about how they're 5-7 and they don't have any innate way of creating spades. They're going to have to create their spades through normal digging, power actions, etc. So the spade bonus tile, like it is for many factions, is very good for the Conspirators. The big building tile, obviously, is very good for the Conspirators. They often build their stronghold early, and so having this tile in the game to give them more workers and points for that stronghold is really strong. And then these other 2 are maybe a little bit less intuitive, but the priest and temporary shipping can both be really good for the Conspirators because, since they often open stronghold, they tend to be a little bit short on priests, especially in the early game. So the priest tile to be able to send it to a cult to really maximize those cult rewards and or advance their shipping, or temp ship to get some shipping and do some expansion without having to find extra priests to invest, can be really, really valuable for the Conspirators. Probably not in round 1, as we'll talk about as much, but often like a round 2 or a round 3, temp ship can work really, really well with the Conspirators. Gray, the color wheel, all the things that you know about that are still really valid here for the Conspirators. So gray, especially in vase map, is very vulnerable to color neighbors. So green in particular, that dynamic is really nasty. So if green's in the game, might want to steer clear of the Conspirators or really any gray faction. Conversely, black and brown, opposite ends of the color wheel, and also with some very nice synergistic leech spots are very good. So if you see them in the game, maybe that much more reason to pick the Conspirators, or again, any gray faction, especially on base map, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. And then as far as the actual round tiles and what scores in what rounds. I actually don't have a lot laid out here on both the good or the bad side, and that's because the Conspirators are pretty flexible faction. They can play a lot of different setups. They can play in a lot of different ways, and that's sort of because their innate ability around the favor tiles is not really tied toward building in a particular direction or a particular way. The only thing is at the very beginning, they do often want to get some favor tiles early to start benefiting from that ability, being able to use those swaps, getting the income associated with them, etc. And so they do often, I would say, by the end of round 2, it's really nice to have both a stronghold and a temple. Best would be is you can build that stronghold in round 1 and take advantage of it. So if there's a stronghold scoring event in round 1, that's going to be that much better. Temple scoring in round 2 goes really well, and the TP scoring, since you have to get a TP to get to either a stronghold or a temple, those are also pretty good for the Conspirators in the early rounds. Conversely, dwelling scoring, not as good for them in round 1, particularly as it is for some of their opponents, and there's 2 reasons for this. Number 1 is because they're kind of building these bigger buildings, they're not often going to be spamming out a bunch of dwellings in the first couple rounds. By the time you get to round 3 or round 4, it's totally fine, but in round 1 particularly, other factions are likely to take much better advantage of a dwelling scoring than you are, and they also might be more inclined to go for a dwelling rush, which is just a generally strong opening for a lot of factions that you probably don't want to be playing against. So dwelling scoring round 1, maybe not so good for the Conspirators. The other reason it's not good is that the cult rewards on dwellings scoring, so both the 4 power for fire that you see here and also the priest for the 4 water steps, are some of the worst or less good rewards. And it's also going to be hard for the Conspirators to hit those in round 1 without sacrificing some income. Like they'd have to take a 3 cult step favor or something like that, which is not as good. So you'd rather have the cult rewards that are associated with the big building tile or the spades from a TP scoring tile. Those are going to be better for the Conspirators and easier for them to take advantage of than the cult rewards that are on the dwelling scoring tiles. And then the other thing I've thrown in here is the round 4 spade event in the bad side, simply because Conspirators can play games where they advance their digging, but I wouldn't say that they are overly inclined to be doing so, especially because they don't tend to spam out a ton of dwelling super early, and they spend a lot of workers early on their bigger buildings. So they don't often get to round 4 and have a huge amount of workers accumulated to be able to advance their digs. And so that's an event that other factions, again, are going to have much more ability to take advantage of and score a bunch of points off of. So if you see that, maybe not as good of a sign for the Conspirators. Not like you can't play a game with them in. I think the worst thing on here for sure is the green, right? The green faction. These other things are not enough reason to maybe not play them, but if you're valuing them in an auction or you're thinking about them, just not necessarily as good. And then on the bonus tiles on the bad side, the 6 coin tile, again, is just going to be better for other factions than it is for the Conspirators, because the Conspirators get so many coins from their favor tiles and all the swapping that's going on, the 3 coin income on their first trading post. They just tend to be not quite as coin short as other factions. Of course, coins are always good, and there's basically no faction in Terra Mystica that ever has too many coins, but Conspirators can do a little bit better in a low coin game than a lot of factions. So that 6 coin tile, it's okay if it's not there. And then the TP and the shipping scoring, again, just something that you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of until later in the game, because you're not going to have a ton of TPs sitting around usually, because you want to upgrade those into Stronghold, Temple to get more favor tiles. And on the shipping scoring, again, that early lack of priest means you're probably not pushing heavy shipping until later in the game. Other factions are going to be able to do better on that than you. But really, all in all here, like the big building scoring tile is really, really good. Round 1 big building scoring is really, really good. And green is really, really bad. And pretty much anything else, you can make it work with the Conspirators. They're a very, very flexible faction. All right, let's talk quickly about the map. So we're talking about base map today. After you've played them on base map, you can explore them on other maps. Some of the gray tropes that you might have learned on Fire and Ice is bad, and Lakes is depends. Like kind of those mostly hold. But let's talk about base map today. And for those who have played gray factions on base map, usually know the main 2 starting spots are these 2 that I have these stars on, E7 and F6, the center gray and the one on the eastern continent. And I would say Conspirators, like Engineers, like Dwarves, like Goats, the other fan faction that we will talk about in a later episode. 95+% of games, you're going to want to start on these two hexes. They're just really good hexes because they have multiple hexes next to them that are only one spade away, reasonably close access to more grays, and they also tend to get a ton of leech, especially, as we mentioned before, if black and brown are in the game to start on E6 or F5 or G5 or E10. These are common starting hexes for those factions, and so if you start on E7 and F6 here as gray, you can get a lot of leech, which for the Conspirators is great, just like leech is good for all factions, especially early in the game. The one exception to starting on these hexes might be if green is in the game. If you are in a game where you've got a green opponent, they will often be interested in starting on E9, which is a pretty nasty spot to then be on F6 here as gray, because connecting to your E7 hex or really going much of anywhere is difficult, because 4 of the 6 hexes next to you are triple digs. One is obviously occupied, as we're talking about, and the last one, G6, black will usually beat you there. So especially as Conspirators who don't often have access to double dig with the first action of the game. So if that's the case and you don't want to have an abandoned structure here on F6, then you might think about H6 or even G1 or F1. There's trade-offs there because you're probably going to get a lot less leech, and particularly in the case of G1 and F1, you may not have neighbors anytime soon, unless maybe blue or yellow in the game and you can kind of get over here, but they're definitely inferior starting spots in general, and I would say only do them if you have specific plan and green is in your way here on E9. But otherwise, play these center hexes, especially if you have no color neighbors at all, no red or green, and you're going to have a really, really great time. You could build a town right out here through the middle somewhere, often another one over here in the west, and then try to get either down south for another one down here, or get around the horn and eventually build a third town over here in the far west. So lots of space for the Conspirators. All the spaces that gray normally occupies on base map, Conspirators are going to follow that same heat map type of thing. All right, so the part you've probably been mostly waiting for, let's talk about openings. So Conspirators have, again, some flexibility here, but I would say that because of the strength of their favorite tiles, you are almost always going to want to open with a Stronghold or at least a Temple. And then the question really becomes, what are you doing alongside that Stronghold or Temple? And on the Stronghold side, it really depends on which bonus tile you get. So for those who've played a lot of Terra Mystica, know that of all the bonus tiles, there are 5 that are the good round 1 bonus tiles for your average factions. There are, of course, some exceptions, which we'll get into with some of the other factions, but Conspirators follow the fact that there's 5: the Spade, Worker Power, the Priest, the Big Building Tile, and Temporary Shipping, that are the ones that are of most interest in round 1 in most games. And so depending on which one of those you end up with indicates what power actions you might be willing to pursue, and then what you're going to do as far as building out other structures. So if you have the Spade tile, which is one of the best bonus tiles in the game, you often will have to be in seat 4 or maybe seat 3 if you want to have a chance of getting this tile. But if you do that and you want to build a Stronghold, you're spending all 6 workers on your Stronghold, which means that if you then want to use that Spade and also build a dwelling with it, you need to take the workers action. You can do a worker conversion, obviously that's not as good. So if you have the Spade tile, I would aim for the workers action and finish the round with your Stronghold plus 2 dwellings, your other initial dwelling plus the new one you've built on the Spade, and you'll be in, that's a great opening for the Conspirators. Flip side, if you get the Worker Power bonus tile, you have that extra worker already, but now you need the Spades. So use that power to get single Spade, or even better, double Spade, and build out a dwelling, or maybe even 2 dwellings if you can do conversion for an extra worker alongside your Stronghold. Similarly to that is if you land on what I would think is probably in most cases the best bonus tile for the Conspirators in round 1, which is the Big Building tile, because then when you build your Stronghold, not only do you get the 2 workers that are on the tile, but you get 4 bonus points at the end of the game, or at the end of the round, so that's great. That tile, similarly, you're going to be looking for spades, single spade, or if you can get enough power to get the double spade before anyone else, that's really great, and build out a dwelling or two in addition to your stronghold. The big building tile, plus if you can get double spade and put both dwellings down with those 2 workers, that is one of the best openings that Conspirators can have. Temp ship is also viable for the Conspirators, a little bit trickier because you often need 2 power actions, or you need a spade power action and a worker conversion in order to really take advantage, especially if you're going to do it in addition to a stronghold. But there are a couple places where this is valuable. So going back, let's just click back to the map for just a second, right? So pretend you start on E7. There's no red in the game. If you get to if you single spade on D4 and build a dwelling, and you have another worker from the workers action, then you could also build on C2 via your temporary shipping. So that can be a viable opening for the Conspirators as well, especially if you think you're going to get a lot of leech. The single spade is, in some games, very contested in round 1, some games much less so you'll have to read what your opponents are interested in looking for to think if you have a viable chance at actually getting both of those power actions. Then there's the Priest, which I think is an underrated pass tile for the Conspirators in round 1, and that's because the Priest most likely will be used to send to a cult, and this can sort of jumpstart their cult economy. Remember that the Conspirators are, because of all their favor tiles, can often do really well in the cult rewards, but start at 0 on all 4 cults, so they need that initial boost, so the Priest can really help them with that. So, and we'll talk exactly how you manipulate the favor tiles in just a second, but if you take that Priest, send it to whatever cult is giving the cult reward in round 1, you can do that, get a good cult reward, and you don't actually need to build anything else besides your stronghold in round 1 with the Conspirators to have a good opening, especially if you're able to pass early enough that you have secured, via some leech that you've gotten or further income, the double dig action in round 2. Opening stronghold plus 1 dwelling, plus a cult reward, plus double dig in round 2 is an excellent opening for the Conspirators that is often able to be done. And then finally, let's talk about what I think is the single best opening for the Conspirators if you can pull it off, but you do need a specific set of circumstances to do so, and that is the Stronghold plus Temple opening. To do this, you need 4 more workers than you start with. So the main way to do this is to get the big building pass tile, which gives you 2 extra workers, and then also get the workers action, which gives you 2 more. The nifty thing about this compared to most other factions that might be interested in opening Stronghold Temple is that the Conspirators' ability from those favor tiles gives you the coins, the extra coins that you need to get to Stronghold Temple. So you don't actually have to find any extra coins, you just have to find the extra workers, and you can open Stronghold Temple, which allows you to build a stronghold, get a favor tile, swap it out for another favor tile, and then get another favor tile with the temple. You do all of that, end round 1 with both of those things being income favors, and you are in like a really, really, really nice spot. The only thing you have to worry about there a little bit is the fact that you're not claiming any extra territory. So if there's some key hexes that you're not contesting, but particularly if you have no color neighbors or you're not worried about where your expansion paths are going to get taken up by your opponents, really excellent opening if you can get on that big building scoring tile. Now, when would you not build a stronghold, right? Which we've already established is an extremely good building. You would do this mainly if there is temple scoring in round 1. That would be probably the most obvious answer, is when you would open temple. TP scoring is okay too, although that also plays on the stronghold. But you'd particularly do it if there's stronghold scoring that you think you want to hit in round 2 or round 3, because if you think that the temple's good enough and you can then get the stronghold in only a round or 2 later and still score it, holding off on that stronghold might be okay, might be worth the points. The other thing to consider, and these might come in combination, is if you can't get any extra workers, the workers action's not available, you didn't get the big building tile or the worker power tile, so you only have your initial 6 workers, but you do think you can get double spade, right? In that scenario, not spending all your workers on the stronghold and instead just building a temple and keeping 2 of those workers to be able to build dwellings on those spades that you dig might be worth it. That's also a very good economic stock for the conspirators, and if you've built 2 extra dwellings, you're going to produce at least 4 more workers, so you should probably be able to build your stronghold in round 2 or round 3, and in which case a temple opening also works. One thing I don't think I've ever actually seen, but is hypothetically possible with the conspirators, is a double temple opening. Most factions to do double temple, one of the ways you can do it is with a big building scoring tile. I wouldn't recommend doing that because if you have the big building scoring tile, you're probably better off just building the big building. But say you get the workers action, double temple could work for the conspirators, especially if you want to play them more culty in a given game, because then those extra priests from the temples will allow you to compete more on the cults than the conspirators often can. So that's an overview of the openings. Again, I think Stronghold is probably 75% of games, and Temple's probably another 20, and then you've got 5% that people kind of go and do wonky stuff. But I think if you're playing the conspirators, for the first time, open with the Stronghold unless you think you have a really good reason not to, and you'll be in a good shape. So now we've opened, and so let's just talk about other things to keep in mind as you then go through the game with the conspirators. So one thing to think about is that the temple and the timing of the favor tiles is a big deal. So this is where we're going to talk about exactly some of the strategies with the favor tiles. So number one is, my first recommendation is always end round 1 with an income favor tile. So the income favor tiles being Fire 1, which gives 3 coins, Earth 2, which gives a worker and a power, or Air 2, which gives 4 power. All of those are excellent and good starts to the economy, especially because if you open with your Stronghold, which doesn't have any base income besides the coins that you're getting from the ability, having that extra income is good, especially if you didn't generate any extra workers. Earth 2 can be particularly good towards supplementing that worker income because you didn't build out any dwellings like a lot of factions do in round 1. And one of the reasons the income favor is that much more important for the conspirators is because this swap ability means that you're not locked into that income favor for the entire game. So you can take the income for a round or 2 rounds, and then you can swap it out for a scoring favor when you're actually ready to build out all those dwellings or build out all those TPs. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to play around with the favor tiles. Now one caveat that is important is I said end round 1 with an income favor tile. Doesn't mean you have to take an income favor tile with your first favor if you're opening with a Stronghold, because remember, the first tile that you take, you're then going to want to swap it out before the end of the round to take advantage of that ability and get those extra 2 coins. So what do you take with that first one? Well, you could take a scoring favor. If you think you're going to be able to put down a dwelling or 2, you might want to grab Earth 1, score those couple dwellings that you build, and then swap it out for an income favor. That's a great way to use that ability. Similarly, if you were going for the big Stronghold temple opening, you might think about, okay, swap it out for Water 1, score that TP that you need to build the temple, and then get rid of it for an income favor. If neither of those are happening, or you have a particularly juicy cult reward that you need an extra step to get to, Water 2 is a very common first favor for the conspirators, because you can take Water 2, hit the button on it for 1 cult step, and then swap it out for an income favor. So a really good example of this is if the first scoring round is the big building scoring round with fire worker rewards. So you get a worker for every 2 steps on fire. You can build your Stronghold, score 5 points for that Stronghold, take Water 2, hit the button, go up 1 step on fire. Now you're 1 step on fire. Swap out the Water 2. You'll lose the 2 steps on water, but you keep the step on fire. Take Fire 1, and now you're generating a worker plus the 3 coins income from Fire 1, plus the coins that you got from the swap. And that's a really nice little economic engine. And so this kind of then leads into the second point here, which is, feel free to use Water 2 and even the 3-step favor tiles as you go through the game to hit key cult rewards. If a 3-step favor tile is going to give you a spade from a cult reward, it's okay. Go ahead, grab it, and then next turn you can swap it out. Unlike any other faction, you're not stuck, so you can actually utilize those 3-step favors in a way that basically nobody else can. The The other thing to think about with the swapping is it is an action, right? So when you're thinking about tempo of I want to pass ahead of someone to get this pass tile, or I want to pass behind them to outstall them so I get their pass tile, just keep in mind that that swap is an action, and so make sure you get it in time or use it to your advantage from that perspective. And then the other one is, in a 4-player game, there still are only 3 copies of favorite tile. If everyone else takes one, you can't swap out for one. So make sure you still, if you really want a copy of Earth 1 before you build out all your dwellings, still, similar like any other faction, make sure you get it. It's just that the Conspirators have the ability to get it through the swap instead of building a new temple or sanctuary. What else is important? Okay, when we think about scoring with the Conspirators, if we go back to, remember their board, there's no victory points anywhere in that board. None of their abilities give any extra victory points. So it is very important for them to use scoring favors, use pass tiles, use the round scoring events to generate enough points to win the game. So swapping out for favor tiles at the right time, like if you're going to hit a round 5 TP round and build 3-4 TPs in that round, make sure you get water 1 before you do that, and then maybe swap it out for air 1 and score that too, right? Like you have a lot of flexibility with the Conspirators, but just keep an eye on those tiles and make sure you grab them before your opponents. If all 3 copies of water 1 are taken, including you have one, and your opponent needs to build a bunch of TPs, don't put that water 1 back right away. Make them build their TPs first, then put it back, right? So keep an eye on both what you're doing and what your opponents need with the favorite tiles, and you'll have a good time. Finally, just keep in mind, Conspirators are like what I would call medium competitive on both network and, somewhat surprisingly in the second case, the cults. They are unlikely to beat factions like the Alchemists, the Nomads on network, but they also can be reasonably competitive, especially if you push that. But don't be counting on 18 network points from the Conspirators going in if you're playing against some of these big network factions, just because the fact that they build up early means that they may not quite get out to the full lengths that some other factions do. And then on the cults, because you do come down those cult steps every time you get rid of a favorite tile, you actually won't end up quite as high as you might think, especially because you're not getting, if you open Stronghold, quite as many early priests that you're sending to cults and getting permanent cult steps. So Conspirators can usually easily end the game with, 12, 16 cults. Maybe they win one in a couple seconds or something like that. But they're unlikely to have a cultist or an Orin type game where they win 3 cults and get second and get, 20, 24, 28 cult points. So just when you're kind of doing your mental math about, okay, where do I think I'm going to end up? How many points do I need to find elsewhere? Just keep that in mind, that even though they are a cult-oriented faction because of the favor tiles, they're probably not going to score quite as many points there as other cult-oriented factions. So we're a little over half an hour, which is my goal for these videos. So we're going to go ahead and close this one out, but I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. Let me know in the comments or come find me on BJ and tell me how your games with the Conspirators go. And get out there, play the fan factions, and stay tuned for more of these videos coming very soon. All right, bye-bye.